From everything we heard when we're talking about a range of issues, he is not backing down. And let's talk specifically about tariffs, reciprocal tariffs in early April. Where are we on this in the economy? And he said, look, 25%, 2%, 100%, whatever it is, there's nothing more fair than that.
I think we can assume this is his strategy, and he is going to continue this trade war. He thinks this is his legacy to remake the American economy. Virtually every stakeholder in the economy is warning him that there will be really tough consequences for American business and for consumers. What are reciprocal tariffs? If a country has a tariff on American products to try to protect its own goods, he's going to just match that. Or he has said maybe he'd even go further than that. So he says these tariffs are here. There will be more of them, and they are here to stay.
All right, let's play that specifically. This is exactly what President Trump just said about reciprocal tariffs.
As you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them. Nobody can complain about that. Whatever it is, it doesn't even matter what it is. If they charge us 25 or 20% or 10% or 2% or 200%, then that's what we're charging them. And so I don't know why people get upset about that, because there's nothing more fair than that.
People, however, Catherine, have been getting upset. And if you look at headlines that are playing out across the country, whether it's behind closed doors, Republicans on Capitol Hill, whether what we have seen firsthand, which is some of the town halls where people are very concerned about the impact overall on the economy, business leaders, we could go on and on about the number of people who are expressing concern. But according to the president, he doesn't know why people get upset.
Well, the reason why people are getting upset is that these tariffs will ultimately, at least in part, be passed along to Americans, whether American businesses or American consumers. The other thing I would point out is that he's not just saying tit for tat on tariff rates. He and his aides have also said non-tariff trade barriers, which are real things. You know, there might be regulatory obstacles that make it harder to...
People may not know what that is, or what you're talking about.
But that's basically like, I don't know, if there's some weird labeling issue that American yogurt needs to have, but other countries' yogurt doesn't have to have, that keeps American yogurt out of a market. That's the kind of thing that we might refer to as a non-tariff trade barrier or quota, things like that. So how they interpret those things and how they translate that to actual tariff rates is still up for debate. We don't know what that's going to mean, but that could as well mean higher tariff rates. And the other thing is, what about places that have lower tariff rates than us? Is he going to match zero tariff rates? No, there's no evidence of that. All we're going to see is a lot of chaos, a lot of uncertainty, and almost certainly higher prices for Americans.
Well, let's go to Canada. Gabe, talk us through what's happening there from that country's point of view, and what's the hope ahead of this planned meeting with U.S. officials tomorrow?
Hi there, Chris. Well, Canadian officials say that they want to meet with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and lower the temperature, although it's a bit of a mixed metaphor right now, because I can tell you it's very chilly here, about 13 degrees here in Charlevoix, where this G7 foreign ministers meeting is set to take place for the rest of the week. But, Chris, we've been speaking with business owners here in Canada who are incredibly frustrated and furious at this trade war. And they just don't seem to understand it. Now, Canadian officials did speak out earlier today, as you mentioned. They slapped the U.S. with a 25% retaliatory tariffs on steel and aluminum. And here's what the finance minister here had to say earlier this morning.
With these most recent tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, the U.S. administration is once again inserting disruption and disorder into an incredibly successful trading partnership and raising the costs of everyday goods for Canadians and American households alike.
Now, something that has struck a particular chord here, Chris, is all this talk about potentially annexing Canada, something that President Trump has repeated over and over again, poking fun at what he called Governor Trudeau and making Canada the 51st state. Every single person I've spoken to here in Canada is furious about that. It really hurts their national pride. And again, they cannot seem to understand it. Now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is set to arrive here in Charlevoix a little later on today. He was asked about what would come up during this this G7 meeting. He did say that this is not a meeting about taking over Canada, but Canadian officials do say that they plan to raise this issue of this trade war repeatedly, Chris.
Gabe, thank you so much for that. Go get warm if you possibly can. I mean, part of the problem, Christine, is that there is this disconnect. There is a fundamental disagreement about exactly what tariffs do, about what they can accomplish. Let me play for you two pieces of sound. One is from the White House press secretary, the other from the head of the EU Commission, and they have completely different views.
Tariffs are a tax hike on foreign countries that, again, have been ripping us off. Tariffs are a tax cut for the American people, and the president is a staunch advocate of tax cuts, as you know.
Tariffs are taxes. They are bad for business and worse for consumers. They are disrupting supply chains. They bring uncertainty for the economy.
And then after Howard Lutnick said that tariffs would lower prices on U.S. goods, the Wall Street Journal editorial board questioned whether the Commerce Secretary actually understood how commerce works. So help us out. What does basic economics tell us?
So the president keeps saying that these tariffs are paid by a foreign government. The tariffs are paid by the importer, right? And the importer sometimes can get a break from a foreign government. Mostly they pass some or not all of these tariffs on to consumers, right? So they're borne by the importer. We know that. But the president doesn't frame it that way. And he insists on looking at it through the lens of McKinley, President McKinley, before there were even automobiles, right? He's going back, way back in time when he thinks that tariffs made America great, and he wants to recreate that, even though so many people around him are saying this is very disruptive. This is incredibly disruptive. It will hurt supply chains. It will raise costs for consumers. And more recently, you've been hearing the president and his team acknowledge there will be some pain, but saying in the long term, it will be worth it. There's just a lot of questions about what is the strategy? What is the strategy? What will the carve-outs be? What will he stick to? And that indecision around the strategy is something that's also sort of fostering all of this uncertainty and concern.
Yeah, worth it to whom is one key question. If you've lost your job, that's a big question, right? But even if the average American doesn't understand the intricacies of tariffs, and why should they, right? That's probably not something.
It's not intuitive.
That's,
I agree.
Let's talk about something they do understand, which is the price of eggs. And of course, we've talked a lot about that. The president talked about it today. Here's what he said.
I don't know if you saw a little thing like the cost of eggs, little to you, but big to people out there, down almost 30% in the last few days. We got it down. We did a lot of things. We have a great Secretary of Agriculture, and we did a lot of things that got the cost of eggs down very substantially.
So, Catherine, let's do a little fact check on that. Where are we with eggs? Because it does affect everyday Americans every day.
Egg prices have actually gone up quite a bit since Trump took office. In the most recent Consumer Price Index report, the retail price, which came out today, the retail price was higher. It's a snapshot in time. It's from a month ago. There is some sign that wholesale prices may have come down a little bit recently, but still very far above what they were when Trump took office. Now, to be clear, presidents do not control prices. They certainly are not going around infecting individual chickens with bird flu, which is the main problem here. But it is incredibly unhelpful, at the very least, that Trump has suppressed data on bird flu transmission, which he is continuing to do. He has censored research coming out of the CDC about new forms of bird flu transmission that scientists have discovered. And he has fired accidentally and maybe rehired bird flu trackers and experts at the USDA. So I do not blame him for egg prices, just as I did not blame President Biden for high egg prices last year, despite what Trump and Vance and other Republicans said. They blamed Biden explicitly. But there are things on the margin that the president could do, and rather than trying to do those things, he is just gaslighting the American people about what's happening to prices.
Well, one of the things he did do yesterday was basically turn the White House driveway into a Tesla showroom. He had made a point the day before that he was going to buy a Tesla because the world's richest man, his net worth has gone down. He's still the world's richest man, but because of what's going on with the stock market. Talk about optics, because here he is promoting Tesla at a time when car companies are getting hammered, people are worried about whether or not they're going to be able to afford a car because the cost of the parts is going up. What's the messaging here, Catherine?
The messaging is he helps his friends and no one else. As you point out, the entire auto industry is terrified about these steel and aluminum tariffs that went into place today and that Trump periodically says may be even higher. And in fact, if you look at the tariffs he had briefly put in place and then repealed a couple of days ago, there were something like 50% tariffs on Canadian steel. That would have made the input costs for a car tariffed at higher rates than the actual car itself. So there's a world in which it would that action alone would have made it cheaper to make cars outside of the U.S. than in the U.S. So yes, the domestic car industry terrified. They're having all sorts of problems. Retailers, car dealerships only have like 3 months of supply on their lots. But then you have Elon Musk, whose stock price is falling for different reasons, which is that he's an incredibly polarizing figure who is alienating customers.
Half a car is steel. 11% of a car is aluminum. That is a huge input cost for these automakers who are, you're right, terrified, although we should put an A instead of the E, because that's exactly what it is, terrified.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest users of aluminum is the manufacturing of the most popular car in America, the Ford F-150, right?
That's right.
So, Christine Romans, Catherine Rampell, we will be talking about this more going forward, but it's great to have both of you here. Appreciate your time.